On kitchen inspections, one area of confusion that continually comes up is AFCI versus GFCI, and where do I need one or the other? Or do I need both? And this confusion often leads to a failed inspection. A lot of installers believe it's either a GFCI or an AFCI, or they believe you can't use an AFCI upstream, so an AFCI breaker in combination with a GFCI receptacle, which is untrue. They both work together. An AFCI breaker upstream from a GFCI will work perfectly fine. And NEC 21012 AFCI branch circuit protection for kitchens has been in the code since 2014. So on inspections, what often comes up is the electrician or the installer believes the GFCI replaces the AFCI. So if you have a GFCI, they're covering that section of the code only. Or they confuse a combination breaker with a dual function breaker. And a combination breaker, I brought up in other videos, is required by the code, but it only addresses parallel and series type faults. So the code does require you have a combination type breaker, a breaker that will pick up series and parallel faults, but it shouldn't be confused with a dual function breaker. A dual function breaker is actually an AFCI, GFCI breaker, an all-in-one breaker. So you may see the breaker labeled different ways, but it's going to indicate on there that it's dual function or all-in-one GFCI, AFCI protection. And if you're protecting the circuit that way, that is fine. You can either have a GFCI receptacle or you can have a dual function AFCI, GFCI, and pick up both of the requirements of the code of 21012, the arc fault requirement, and 2108, the GFCI requirement. And as I mentioned earlier, the installer believes that you can't combine an AFCI breaker upstream with a GFCI receptacle, which is incorrect. Or the other thing I find is the installer, the electrician, thinks appliances like the dishwasher, the refrigerator, the disposal can't be on an arc fault breaker, which they can and they're required to. So in 21012B dwelling units, it tells us that kitchens are covered. All 120 volt single phase, 10 amp, 15 amp, and 20 amp circuits are required to be arc fault protected. And number one in 21012B is kitchens. So if it's a 120 volt circuit, it's 10, 15, or 20 amps, you have to protect it with an arc fault breaker. So on inspections, what I find most electricians do, they either protect the circuit with a dual function AFCI, GFCI breaker, and that picks up 210.8 of the NEC or 21012 of the NEC, or they use an AFCI breaker upstream and a GFCI receptacle. If you want to check your GFCI and AFCI requirements before your next inspection, I created a simple field-ready guide that you can take out on the job site with you, and I'll leave links for it in the pinned comments and also in the description. Also, if you want a more in-depth look at AFCI requirements, you can go to my blog, buildingcodegeek.com, where I have a post that breaks AFCI requirements down in more detail, and I'll leave that link also in the pinned comments and in the description.